Hi, and welcome to Legends of Land Rights. In this series, we'll be showcasing Aboriginal people right throughout New South Wales that have made significant contributions to the land rights legislation within the state of New South Wales. In this show, we'll be showcasing Gary Williams, a Gumbaggynir man from Nambucca Heads, who, amongst other things, worked in the legal services, the Aboriginal Medical Services, land councils, and of course, self-determination. Gary Williams, thanks for joining us. You've been involved in land rights now for quite some time. What brought you towards land rights? Was it the 1967 referendum? Was it the freedom rides in 1965?
Well, I don't know whether it was land rights at the time, but back in the 60s when I went to Sydney, well, actually just learning about our island over there that was taken away from us. So
That, of course, is Stewart Island.
Stewart Island, which is now a golf course. But we grew up with that, and so we knew and how people were moved to Kempsey, taken away from their land, and their land's taken away from them. We listening to old people talking, but I think as land rights as such, as when I went to Sydney and talked to people down there were things like Fakatsi, of course. My uncle Clive Williams, I'd run into him, and of course then you got introduced to Tranby, you got introduced to Aboriginal Progressive Associations, Albert Groves. It's actually in one of those meetings where I met Dulcie Flower. So just not so much talking with them, but listening to them talk. So you formed this wider view of things, yes.
1965, you were some 21 years of age then, and the freedom ride, of course, had gone through, and they came through the North Coast here, and you were actually part of that freedom ride. Did that have an influence?
I was actually 19 then.
Oh, 19, I'm sorry.
And, well, that was... And I was at Sydney Uni when they were talking about it, so I'd gone to the meetings and stuff. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go on the ride itself, and I had to come home. And I said that I'd meet up with them at Bowraville and Kempsey, so I did that little bit with them, yes.
The teachings or the examples that your William Fergusons, your Jackie Pattons, William Coopers that they did, Pearly Gibbs, did that have an influence on your life?
A little bit later, I think Chicka was more talking about them and how he knew them, and so, but it's, generally speaking, with Fakatsi and all that, you're listening to people talk, and of course listen to what was happening with. Well, Charlie was there talking with people about the freedom ride and everything like that. So I was starting to formulate my world up to then, and I think still does. It starts from Nambucca and moves out, and so that was the window to a wider world, and after a while you could see how Nambucca fitted into the whole lot. So yeah.
You spent quite a considerable amount of time in Sydney, becoming politicised with a number of particularly community control things down there. Then you came back to Nambucca Heads. How much of an influence did that have with you?
I think, strangely enough, and we heard a little bit about this too without knowing all the details. So we know about the island and how it got lost, but how our older relatives were involved with what would you call it? Well, it turns out to be the Aboriginal Australia Progressive Association. John Maynard wrote the book about his grandfather, and Nambucca and Kempsey, I think, were had the branches there in 1926. So people, you know, you kept telling you about how you and my grandmother's brother, those kind of things, and uncles and everything were involved way back then. So you didn't know the details at the time, yeah.
And now, what does land rights mean to Gary Williams?
At the moment, it's so, the world is much more complicated than, you know, the early 70s or late 60s. What it means to me at the moment is how I can see it is how a whole lot of people are impacted by things relating to land rights, and that includes native title, and how, for me, it's not so much the fight, the fire's there, but seeing how these things impact on people. So, and the processes. I was talking to Sam Watson at Woodford this year, and we both were involved with native title. So, and I said, how are you going with the native title? Because I knew he was involved with it up in Brisbane there, and he said, it's the process. And I said, it's basically the same with me, because and you could see how, and you could probably see it easier with native title than with the Land Rights Act. How people have grabbed something and doing hopeful things in their mind that you almost find yourself an eyewitness of what's going on. So I'm involved with the native title. I say that, and it doesn't make it any easier, but New South Wales were quite lucky that they had a Land Rights Act, so that people were able to talk about land, think about land, fight for, all that stuff that's happening now with native title. We went through it back then, for good or bad. It's the way of the world, you know. Politics of language, politics of land. It's all in us.
In fact, this is the 30th anniversary of the New South Wales land rights legislation.
That's right, and no matter what you may think of the politics of New South Wales and the politics of land rights, it gave people a basis to be able to talk about it. It also gave them, and even though most of the organisations may have gone through administration, but they've come out the other side, so they'd gone through a learning curve, and they were able to talk about it. Now, it doesn't make it any, you know, land is politics through and through, and it's hard and hard fought, and amongst yourselves as well as the powers that be. But and so in one sense we're it's that continuation of a fight, but for somebody who's been around a while, I try to look at it as a person who can see similarities. You know, I see things that are going on, and I say, oh, that happened in '69 down there, or something like that. You know, and I could see things, the lead up to the Land Rights Act. You know, people were saying, arguing about it, and saying, you know, this needs to be in, and it doesn't reflect the proper philosophy of land rights. You know, we saw it in the federal governments with the Northern Territory, the same kind of thing, and I, in one sense, each generation needs to find their own way of fighting for and fighting against, and try to learn from mistakes of the past.
You spent quite a bit of time up in the Northern Territory, particularly around Uluru and other areas there. You spent time in other states and indeed other territories. How did you fit those into the context of land rights in New South Wales?
It's the three different legislations, and New South Wales, even if you may think it's maybe not wide enough, there's a bit of restrictions on them. I actually came down in '77, and they had a meeting in Redfern at the Black Theatre. A bloke called Duncan Rabunja and myself came down and said, don't look at the Northern Territory because it's a very restrictive reading of land rights, and I find that native title is even more restricted. But without quoting Gary Foley on anything, but he basically says native title isn't land rights.
Well, I was going to say that Gary Foley's position is,
yes,
is native title land rights.
Yeah,
Says no,
and reconciliation isn't, yes. But they're a fact of life, and you've got to, and sometimes we had the saying, you know, we're getting land rights despite the Northern Territory Land Rights Act, and so but you know, as I said, they're a fact of life. People are there to administer what comes down under the Act, just like land councils here, and you're dealing with the local people who have their own ideas of what they want to get out of it.
You were back there, and you were saying back in the '60s and early '70s in Sydney that you headed up a lot of the things there. You're certainly involved in the Aboriginal Medical Service, the Aboriginal Legal Service,
yes,
the Tent Embassy, and I even protested and even put your voice across in the barbecue area that had a satirical but very political message.
It was. It was a happy coincidence that I was able to get that. Yes.
How so? I mean, all that time there back then, you had it was the fight for rights.
Yes.
The Vietnam War, South Africa, apartheid, the women's movement through Germaine Greer coming to the fore, and
Yes.
you were one of a bunch of young Aboriginal people that said, well, look at the issues here at home.
Well, and yes, I wasn't so much involved with the anti-Vietnam, but you just knew a lot of people who were. Certainly the anti-Springboks, and I've also helped out with the referendum. So and of course we were drawn to the foundations, young people, and where I do feel that, you know, where the people from all over came and talked to each other, and it may not have been in a political type of way, but and let's not forget the Redfern Street scene where places like the Emperor's was the meeting place for everybody, and so and I'm talking, you know, at the same time as the foundation, you know.
Certainly that nowhere else for Aboriginal people than to drink.
Well, that's right.
But you were branded at one stage in the centre spread of the Sunday paper as a Black Power advocate, along with Gary Foley, Billy Craigie, I think Dennis Walker and Tony Curry.
And the anonymous field marshal.
And you were the anonymous field marshal. Did those days like that? I mean, that I don't know, transforming of the American civil rights movement to the Aboriginal, the similarities there.
The similarities were there. They tried to say that there are no similarities actually, and fights of that nature are universal, really, and so we actually didn't try to, except for shock value, try to be really Black Panthers, and we've got to realise that at this time, you know, the media were quite hadn't come across anything like this homegrown. They looked overseas and they could see things happening, you know, even then anti-Vietnam War kind of thing, and suddenly it's people saw that struggle is the same struggle here too, and so as I said, for shock value, even if we played along with that line, it was worth it.
But basically, black control of black affairs.
Black control of black affairs.
And I think you took that fight through. You were one, along with others, that took the fight through to the Fakatsi meetings to say to the older. I mean, Fakatsi at that stage was controlled mainly by a lot of white people. Right. And the young radical group, or the so-called Black Power group, that come through, challenged that and said that, you know.
Well, that's right, and I was going to say something else, but we also and the taking on of things, what the Black Panthers did in San Francisco is they opened the storefront legal service and things like that. There were other storefront legal service operating in San Francisco, say, just like there was down in Melbourne in Carlton Legal Service. But we decided, as they did, we'll bring the people along with programs. So it wasn't just, you don't feed the people politics. You just create programs to help them along. So you've got a legal service, medical service, Marawina, the
Housing
food,
and
the housing, and the
children's
food,
service,
children's
veggie,
service, breakfast, yeah, those kind of things, so that
community control, and that's where the birth
exactly,
of community control.
exactly, and so that we weren't just spouting meaningless words. Yes.
And you learnt all you could down there, and what you gained, the knowledge you gained. I think you were a judge's associate at one stage to Hal Wotton.
Jacobs is Judge Jacobs his name was, yes.
Yeah.
But
We can cut that.
I thought I'd do some law in '71, and it started with Paul Coe, and that was short-lived. But the early days of the legal service, a lot of the legal input came from the New South Wales Law School, and Hal Wotton was the dean out there. And when they did set up the legal service, well, I was his
Associate.
no. I was. He was president. I was vice president of the legal service. So, in one sense, when that photo of me at the as the anonymous field marshal turned up, it was because first of all, I realised you just can't do these things and be a vice president of the legal service at the same time. So, and we did have a talk, Al and I, and it said you really got to choose what, you know. You can't do any that. What would you, as we did then? You can't just kind of go and make a political statement as such like that, and you've got to be aware that you're also of the holding a position in an organisation like the legal service.
But of course, another feature was there was the infamous false arrest down near the Haymarket in Street Theatre.
I think that may have been the led up to that statement with Hal. I don't think I've ever. I know one of the blokes who were involved, the actors involved. He lives here on the North Coast, and I mean, it's one of those things where it was too good to pass up, so, and because I knew them, and I decided to go along with it, and then.
I was saying it's the 30th anniversary of the State Land Council's legislation, but a lot of the beginning, probably the first 10, 12, 15 years of the land councils, particularly prior to the legislation going through, and certainly afterwards, was the important role that Aboriginal Legal Services played in the establishment of a lot of local land councils, or land councils per se, even down the south coast, out the west, particularly Burke, Broken Hill, Brewarrina, with the solicitors that worked in the legal service and the field officers that worked in the legal services became, proponents of local land councils.
Well, that's right, and I do think. I did when I was with the legal service. I was helping get representations into the country areas, and so I met some of the great fighters like Steve Gordon and Tombo Winters and Keith Smith down the South Coast. I'd known them by telephone for about a year until they came to town to the Christmas party, and we finally saw each other face to face. Funny, you knew them by talking over the phone with them and everything like that. And helping to get the legal service at Brewarren, the first country service up. So and it was all tied in with land rights. Yeah.
As were, of course, those other organisations, your medical services and your housing companies.
That's right.
And just non-representative people. I mean, there are people out there that just...
So all of these things meant that people out the country weren't on their own when they were fighting for something. There was somebody they can ring up, or somebody they can get to help them, specifically. Yeah.
Like yourself, there's a lot of other warriors, a lot of other Aboriginal fighters. Tombo Winters comes to mind, Steve Gordon, Lyle Munro Sr., and quite a few others that didn't come to Sydney and stay. They actually come to Sydney, became educated on civil rights, became educated just on rights, then went back and stayed back in their country to make sure that that their people were not missing out. You, in actual fact, Gary, become involved. You come up here and set up the Language Centre, along with other things, the fight for Stewart Island, the fight for, just to exist in Nambucca Heads.
For me, it's like the turning of the circle, and I certainly don't miss not going on with any studies or anything like that. I think I've come around to say that they're helping with languages, and we here we work between the Hawkesbury and the Queensland border, which are about 8 languages, and I do give a pat on the back for ATSIC because they were, I think this area, the Many Rivers region, was the only ATSIC region that applied to the Endangered Languages Fund. And I was talking with my brother Des, who was on the board then, and he said I was the one who fought for it. So out of all those ATSIC regions, we were the only ones. So we're very lucky that they've done it, and they came to us. They said, if we get the money, would you be able to implement the program throughout our region? So we said, yeah.
Is there anything that should have been done differently in relation to New South Wales land rights? I mean, would you have, looking back in hindsight, would you have made things different?
I do think that and looking back now, we certainly had a program that was much more wide-ranging than what happened. But then again, you look at Murray, who was the... Was it Murray Isaac?
Murray Keane.
Murray Keane, I was thinking. Yes, Murray Keane, but he's also allied with, what was his name, Andrew West? He was with Nationals, I think. So, to get this through, then you had to talk across a whole spectrum of people. And, I'm missing the kind of details now, but so that as of its nature, and in fact, there was really heavy-duty scenes out on the night of the saying, you sold us out and everything like that. As of its nature, looking back, it's a compromise, like anything else. The Northern Territory was a watering down of the original, and another watering down with it, Malcolm Fraser. But as I look at it now, it's done. We live with it. We make the most of it now. We're not let's not fool ourselves. It's land rights in the way we wanted it.
Will native title sit beside the legislation in New South Wales, or is it on its own?
It'll sit beside it. We actually have a national park here, and it was land granted to us under the Land Rights Act. But at the same time, when it was resumed, before it actually started to be claimed, we put a native title on it. So in fact, this is the only area where this complication has occurred, or maybe down at Stockton. But it's they're going to have to work together. So there is no reason to suggest that it can't, but it'll, as of its nature, state versus federal, and what each side wants out of it, then it has to be talked through fully. Yeah.
Gary, so what does land rights mean to you?
Garamani, take back. Ngiambandi Jogun. Reclaim our land. Yamandi. Ngianya. Juna. Ngawanga. To reclaim our land that speaks to us in our language.
A proud Gumbaggynir man from Nambucca Heads, Gary Williams, thanks for your time.
Okay.